This is the second installment of the notes on Chapter 2 from the Guffey textbook in our business communication class. We left off on this particular slide. I think we had not completed it yet, but it has to do with defining successful teams, the characteristics of successful teams. And so the notion, of course, of small size yet diverse makeup, and of course you realize there are balancing issues there. If you get a team that's too small, then you don't have the diversity that might make it a more successful team. On the other hand, certainly you can get a team that's too large, and as a result, be unable to come to conclusions or to assign responsibilities or to really make the most out of the diversity that's possible. Agreement on purpose, knowing what it is that the committee or the team is supposed to do, what its responsibilities and authority are in fulfilling that purpose. Agreement on procedures, when you're going to meet and who's going to call meetings and how they're going to proceed, and whether you're going to, let's say, hold the meeting until a particular task is achieved, or whether you're absolutely going to stick to a time schedule. There are a lot of issues there that often come up, and you don't know about them until you have problems. The ability to deal with conflict. Conflict is something that should be part of any team. If you've got diverse opinions, and especially if people care about the topic or the issue or the goals of the team, then you're going to have some measure of conflict to deal with. Use of good communication techniques, that's a given, and that's what different parts of this chapter address. Ability to collaborate, this is really more of a spirit or understanding that really we have a whole lot more in common than we have differences, and so it's important for us to realize hopefully you have a team that's united in its overall purpose. Accept the ethical responsibilities that go along with operating the team. To know that there are certain types of behaviors or activities, pressures that may be brought to bear that are on each other or in obtaining information, some that are legitimate and of course others that aren't. And then shared leadership, so that it's not always one person who seems to be making the final call on things. In dealing with conflict, there are 6 steps that need to be considered here. First of all, listen. Learn to listen. We speak a bit more, talk a bit more later about what it means to be a good listener. Understand the other point of view, not just to hear it, but to really try to understand where they're coming from, what it is that the arguments are for the other side. Show concern for the relationship. This is an important one. It's not just about getting the job done. It's not just about the issues, but ultimately, and it's especially the case, where you're on a committee of work co-workers where you have to see each other every day, or you may be on other work committees later on. You have to get along. And so you have to show some concern, or I should say it's important to show concern for the relationship that transcends a particular issue or a particular committee assignment. Look for common ground, things that the people agree on. Invent new problem-solving options. Think about other ways of doing things or looking at things. Among other things we've talked about earlier in the previous slide, show about how decisions come about through majority, through a consensus, through the minority decision-making process or whatever. So, those are some things to consider. Reaching a fair agreement, that is, not always feeling like you've got to get the most for your side or for your particular angle, but reaching an agreement that so that everyone has something and gets that it's a fair result. There are roles played by team members, some of which, as we see here, are positive ones: participation encourager, a rule setter, a problem identifier, information contributor, empathic listener. I'm sure there are other positive roles that people play as well. Someone, for instance, to keep the group on task. What kinds of statements might be made by these role players? So I've asked my class, the on-ground class, to think about what kind of things would you expect these kind of people to say? The participation encourager, for instance, might be someone who picks out someone who hasn't said much or has a look on their face like they've got something to say, or maybe aren't quite in agreement with some other things that have been said. You might have to say, Kylie, what do you think about this? It looks like you've got an opinion, or you've got some ideas about this issue here. someone who's a problem identifier, who may even see problems of how the team works, not just the issue, but how the team is accomplishing that. Information contributor. Some people will come to meetings. It's not their job, but they will come with data on the topic. And those sorts of people you need all of these people here. But you also have very often people who serve negative roles, and you won't necessarily have every one of these represented in a team, but you'll probably have some of them, and it's important to be able to identify them and to know how to handle them. The blocker who's just always, let's say, every idea that comes up has problems. They're not willing to hear out much of anything. They've always got the negative side of things. The attacker, that is, that really their arguments are, as we sometimes say in Latin, ad hominem. They're against the person. And so someone makes a suggestion and they come against that person rather than the idea or the solution that person is proposing. The task avoider, someone who just never is able, for instance, if you want to divide up responsibilities for a committee, to gather information or to talk to other people or to assemble, even to contact other members who aren't there to follow up on their absences. There are some people that just, they don't want to be there, they don't want to be involved, and so you've got to really, if you let those people, those task avoiders, get away with it, then it just makes more and more work for others, and so they will enjoy, in some sense, the benefits of being a member of the committee, maybe the praise that might come with it, or simply checking something off a list, but they won't, unless you really make them or put them in a situation where they have to do work, they'll simply avoid that. The joker, the withdrawer, the time waster, I think we can all see some of these. Time wasting, somebody who continually shows up late. Then that's one way to avoid tasks. They might show up late intentionally because they know that certain assignments are going to be made, of work assignments are going to be made before they get there. Or they'll leave early for the same reason. And the withdrawer, somebody who just hangs back and doesn't say anything, multitask, they're on their phone or whatever, which is just a terrible thing to do. You don't want to be that person on the job that is known for always being on their phone, always being distracted in some way. And I've asked my students in the on-ground class to think what kinds of statements might be made by these role players, or more broadly, what kind of behaviors would help you to identify these types of people. Skills for team leaders, interpersonal relationship skills, the ability to regulate participation, to maybe, let's say, limit the contributions of some people who are more aggressive and more active, and to draw out those who may have something to contribute who simply are reluctant to do so. Trying to maintain a positive climate, which generally means you've got to be moving forward and have to set limits on how long a discussion can take place, or what sorts of topics will be discussed. Maintaining mutual respect. That starts at the top, of course, in showing respect, the leader showing respect for each other. One of the ways you show respect, I think, any team member is by showing up on time. Respecting people's schedules, knowing that if you show up late, then others will potentially show up late, and the meeting time will simply drag out and expand relative to the amount of work that actually gets done. So showing up on time, ending on time. When you say you're going to do something, doing it, that really shows respect for people. There are no other ways, but that comes to mind to me. Instigating group self-analysis, asking, how are we doing? Let's look at the progress we've made. What can we do better? Resolving conflict and instigating conflict. These are sort of the obverse and the reverse of a coin. You don't want you don't want chaos. But if you've got order all the time, then you don't have change, you don't have challenge. And so drawing out people and bringing out these opposing ideas is something that a good leader has to know how to do so that the team can be successful. Sometimes you may be on a team with someone who seems just always irritated with you. It comes out sometimes in that you might have something to say, and it seems like whatever you say, this person has something negative to say about it, or it can be body language, where they simply scowl or frown with that. So if that happens, here's a good process to follow. Ask for a private meeting. Say, can I talk to you for a few minutes? And then just get them aside and say, I may be wrong, but here's what I have just been observing. And then tell them what you've observed. And then ask them to respond, solicit feedback. And don't think you have to answer every claim that they make. Let them do a little venting. Sometimes people just want to be heard, and you want to try to be objective about this. Keep in mind, you're the one that asked for the meeting, so they should have time to say what they want to say. But then ask, can I respond to those? You brought up a number of, several points here, so let me see if I can, process some of this. And it's quite all right to, as I said, to process it, to say, you said this, but here's what that, I remember that situation, or you might say, I'm sorry, I just don't remember that at all, but I'll try to be more thoughtful about that. And so that's one way. You don't want to let those things fester, because it's like a a problem with your car. The car starts making a strange noise. That's not going to heal itself. It's something that's going to have to be dealt with sooner before it becomes a bigger problem than later on. In your notes, there are, again, a space for sort of these things. I'm not sure if there's a space for spaces for this particular slide here, but of course, being able to listen, active listening it does require effort, and many of us are not very good listeners. And yet, to be a good manager, you've got to be in a position to solicit, to listen to, and then to properly process and respond to criticisms in particular. Most of us don't have good listening habits. I think this goes back to your notes here. Very few of us receive training in listening. We just don't have that much experience in it. Even if you've had a speech communication class, you've really been taught how to develop a speech, how to speak, but not necessarily how to listen. Other sounds and stimuli compete for our attention. Certainly you want to remove distractions you have control over, but it may be a matter sometimes of taking someone aside rather than having a serious conversation in a hallway, stepping into a stairwell, or setting another time for a meeting. And to understand that we process speech much faster than others can speak. So there's always going to be some opportunity when somebody's talking to daydream, to not pay attention. And so we want to, you want to give people adequate attention and respect when they are speaking. Types of workplace listening. The communication that you and I engage in is really different depending on who we're talking to. You wouldn't speak to a well-educated adult the way you might speak to a small child. You change your speech patterns. You change the inflection of your voice. Our kids didn't grow up we didn't do baby talk with our kids. Some families do that sort of thing, but they do that, in order, well, let me just say this represents one of those ways in which we speak differently depending on who we're speaking to. Well, I can tell you, if I'm sending an email to President Williams to offer some sort of suggestion or criticism, I'm going to be very careful about how I phrase that. I'll use a lot more indirect approach than direct approach. If I'm someone who reports to me, someone who's instructed, their job maybe depends on taking direction from me, I'm going to speak differently to them. I'm going to be more direct. It has to do with a very different relationship there. We in an ideal world that matter, you talk the same way to everybody, but that's not realistic. And so we have to understand that there's a different way of listening to and of communicating with people, whether they're superiors, that is, people above us in the hierarchy, whether they're side to side, or our peers, for instance, and whether they're in a different relationship, particularly if they are below us in the hierarchy as our employees. 10 keys to building powerful listening skills. I'll start this on the next slideshow.